and welcome to our long weekend edition of APTN National News. I'm Daryl Stranger. On Thursday, Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs, along with BC and federal government, signed a memorandum of understanding, entering negotiations and rights and title in the territory located in northern British Columbia. Lee Wilson has more.
Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs are entering negotiations 23 years after signing the historic Delgamuth-Gasteway case, where they heard their Aboriginal rights and title existed. The MOU recognizes the traditional governance of the clan system as the holder of authority on the territory. The deal was signed today through a virtual meeting. BC Minister of Indigenous Relations Scott Fraser on the importance of the agreement.
It's been 23 years since the Delgamuth-Gasteway court decision that moved towards recognition of rights and title for the Wet'suwet'en people, but didn't complete. You know, it's a memorandum of understanding. It's not the end, it's the beginning.
This morning, protests against the signing took place outside the office of Wet'suwet'en. Not all Wet'suwet'en feel this is a victory for the nation. Elected chiefs have been vocal that they have not been consulted. COVID-19 put restrictions on large gatherings. Bonnie George, speaking as a clan member, says the signing should be delayed.
It was at the height of the COVID-19 crisis throughout the world, and they held some clans held Zoom meetings, which some of our elders and chiefs weren't comfortable doing because this is such a huge topic, important topic, and it shouldn't be discussed through Zoom. It needs to be discussed through face-to-face.
The negotiations are scheduled for 3 months. It is unknown if it will address the Coastal GasLink project. Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs have opposed the construction of a 670-kilometer natural gas pipeline. A large section runs through their territory. This agreement could lay the groundwork for future land disputes.
It was a first step towards resolving some very difficult and complicated issues around Wet'suwet'en rights and title, which have remained unresolved. Submit that by resolving these issues, we can avoid the kind of conflicts that we've seen on the land and work together, you know, not just to benefit government or the Wet'suwet'en, but for the benefit of the people, all the people who live in the region.
Lee Wilson, APTN National News, Smithers.
The Congress of Aboriginal Peoples, or CAP, is taking Indigenous Services Canada to federal court over what they say is inadequate and discriminatory funding for its membership. CAP says it represents 90,000 non-status and off-reserve Indigenous people. It's asking for a judicial review of the $250,000 Indigenous Services Canada gave the organization to support its members during the COVID-19 pandemic. Robert Bertrand is CAP's national chief. He addressed the House of Commons Standing Committee on Indigenous and Northern Affairs on Wednesday.
This was the result of a competitive bureaucratic process that pitted off-reserve organizations against each other. This means about $25,000 per PTO, or less than $3 per capita for those in need in our communities across the country. $15 per capita is not enough for effective support programs for the most marginalized groups in Canada. I don't need to reiterate the poverty, chronic health issues, over-policing, and discrimination faced by our Indigenous people.
When it comes to COVID-19, the Mohawk community of Kanesatake in Quebec has had a totally clean bill of health with 0 cases reported. But as the province gradually reopens, Kanesatake's call to keep up checkpoints isn't sitting well with neighbors. Lindsay Richardson reports.
It's not the first time Kanesatake Mohawks set up checkpoints on the community's main thoroughfare. But unlike Wet'suwet'en solidarity or other protests, this time it's not political.
This has nothing to do with any land claims or anything political. This is simply health-based. We're trying to save lives.
There are 0 cases of COVID-19 in Kanesatake, even though the virus is encroaching on nearby towns. Grand Chief Serge Simon says reinforced borders are keeping the population safe.
It's almost like we're an island, and all around us you'll see little red dots of all the infections of the surrounding area. It's like there's a sea of it surrounding us.
But with tourist season approaching and the province looking to reopen, Oka Mayor Pascal Quevillon asked the emergency response unit to stand down and defer to provincial police. Simon says the SQ won't exert proper controls. Ganizadage has turned away thousands of cars since the pandemic began.
Despite that, he still went ahead and he threatened our checkpoint or dissuasion points with arrest.
On Monday, council was served a cease and desist notice signed by Quévillon threatening legal action. According to the document, the inconvenience and detours for Oka residents are, quote, unacceptable and intolerable, but the response unit won't budge.
Bonjour, Okoise, Okoa.
So Quévillon took to Facebook Wednesday saying the checkpoints created tax-free jobs for Ganizadage. And the only explanation for no cases, he says, is that 0 tests were done.
De dire que leur façon de faire fonctionne parce qu'ils ont 0 cas sur leur territoire, c'est totalement faux. Ce n'est pas réel, malheureusement.
Simon says no one was tested because no one developed symptoms. But protecting elders and language keepers remains the priority.
We've had a history of surviving this. So we're not going to let some government tell us when it's time for us to live and die.
Having already survived cholera, smallpox, and tuberculosis outbreaks, the Grand Chief says Ganizadage is willing to persist despite the order until there's a COVID-19 vaccine. Lindsay Richardson, APTN National News, Ganizadage, Mohawk Territory.
Alberta prosecutors dropped an appeal in the acquittal of Tasha Mack. Mack and her boyfriend Joey Cryer were found guilty of manslaughter in the death of 19-month-old Anthony Rain. Chris Stewart has more.
Anthony Rain was just 19 months old when a passerby found his body outside an Edmonton church in 2017. He had been outside for 3 days. He was covered in bruises. Official cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. Joey Cryer and his then-girlfriend, Tasha Mack, were charged with second-degree murder. Both were found guilty of manslaughter. Court of Queen's Bench Judge David Labyrinth said the Crown could not prove Cryer committed the assault, so he convicted him of manslaughter. As for Tasha Mack, Queen's Court Bench Judge Robert Grassier said the Crown did not prove murderous intent, but she allowed the abuse of her baby to continue. He convicted her of manslaughter. The Crown appealed Mack's conviction. They said the judge had not allowed her videotape statement to be used in court. The judge said the Crown would not introduce the statement to trial, but then they attempted to do so. Now the Crown has dropped its appeal. APTN spoke to the Crown, who said after the review, the judge did not commit any errors during the trial. Both Joey Cryer and Tasha Mack are awaiting sentencing for manslaughter. Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Edmonton.
Hey, it's time for a short break, but coming up, Courtney Skye sits down with Dennis Ward to discuss her research at the Yellowhead Institute and the discrepancy in COVID-19 case numbers on Indigenous communities. Welcome back. Concerns were raised about a traditional Sundance ceremony in Saskatchewan last weekend, where the RCMP showed up on 2 occasions. Priscilla Wolf has the story.
Clayton Sutherland was hosting the Sundance on Sunday, May 10th, when 2 RCMP officers went to the ceremony site.
Both groups walked towards the Sundance ceremony. As politely as I could, I stopped them and told them they couldn't proceed because guns are not allowed. I didn't really want to explain the whole traditional explanation as to why the RCMP guns were not permitted, because I didn't want a confrontation.
Sutherland thought everything was okay and that the officers were leaving when he noticed them driving towards the arbor. He says a woman had to physically stand in front of the RCMP vehicle to stop them from going any further.
No one is permitted to go across that east gate, because that's for spirituality purposes. She more or less held up her arms and she motioned with her head and nose. They can't go through there. So they stopped their cruiser and they backed up and they drove off.
The RCMP released this statement to APTN when asked about the officers going to the Sundance site. As the province continues to have a public health order in place, the Saskatchewan RCMP remains committed to following up on reports of public gatherings and other activities that may contravene to public health order. At no time did RCMP officers ask for the ceremony to stop, No charges were laid by the RCMP. Sutherland says social distancing practices were followed during the ceremony. Indigenous Services Canada says it contacted the leadership of the Cree Nation to discuss precautions that could be taken. ISC maintains regular communications with First Nations leaders across Saskatchewan and have committed to developing jointly a more culturally responsive process to support communities in cultural gatherings. Any decision to cancel or postpone these types of cultural practices remains the decision of community leadership alone. Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations Chief Bobby Cameron was firm with his response to what happened.
Stay off our lands. These are our lands. You have no right being here unless you're invited. And all those officials, don't talk about our ceremonies. That is none of your business.
Priscilla Wolf, APTN National News, Saskatoon.
There is a major discrepancy in the number of confirmed COVID-19 cases in Indigenous communities reported by Indigenous Services Canada and what's actually happening on the ground. According to ISC, as of Wednesday, there were 185 confirmed positive cases on First Nations. But research by the Yellowhead Institute found hundreds more cases of the virus. To explain, Dennis Ford is joined by Courtney Skye, who did the research for the Yellowhead Institute.
Courtney, thanks for being with us. Why did you want to take a closer look at the COVID-19 data?
Well, I was noticing that there were a lot of reports in our area around Ontario, specifically Akwesasne, Ganawage, and Six Nations, where the reports for the numbers that were coming out of our community a few weeks ago made it seem like we were the only community that had any cases. If you were comparing the community reported data to that Indigenous Services was thinking about happening in communities. And that didn't make sense to me because I had seen from different news coverages that there were other communities that were reporting cases as well. And so I wanted to kind of confirm the data that was being presented by Indigenous Services Canada and just to, understand what was happening there. I work primarily as a researcher, as a policy analyst when it comes to missing and murdered Indigenous women. And I know from the National Inquiry, they raised a number of issues around data collection, and they weren't able to define a clear number of Indigenous women that are missing or have murdered because the data collection isn't there. And I suspected that was likely the case also in this health information data. And so that's why it was important to me to actually compare these numbers and figures and challenge what Indigenous Services was reporting.
And so what are you finding and what methods do you use that Indigenous Services isn't?
So Indigenous Services Canada is only reporting the number of cases that are occurring on reserve. They are not reporting cases of people that live in urban centers, and they are not reporting a fulsome Indigenous picture. They're not reporting cases around Métis or Inuit. Sometimes they'll do updates around Inuit communities, but that's separate from their total as well. And I know that, people that are First Nations and Indigenous recognize the fact that we have relationships with people that don't necessarily live on reserve. I have family that lives in urban centers. I have family that lives in the U.S. And so I'm more interested and I'm concerned about some of these other areas as well, not just exclusively what's happening on reserve, but also because there's that relationship. People that are away at school might be coming back as schools were canceled. That spread from urban centers was likely going to occur and happen into on-reserve communities. And being prepared for that, understanding, in urban centers, what Indigenous people are contracting COVID-19, what their relationships are to our communities, that's something our community should be aware of.
So what number did you arrive at, and what does the discrepancy between that number and what the government's presenting and the reality on the ground say to you?
So I was able to find about 465 cases of COVID-19 that had been reported by on-reserve communities, whether that is, by Indigenous communities. So that would include on-reserve communities, but also urban centers and the different public health agencies that are also reporting and collecting data around their communities, and then different local reports. I was also able to find 7 different people who had died because of COVID-19 that were First Nations. Right now, Indigenous Services Canada is only reporting that there have been 2 deaths when we've been able to identify 7, so it's actually 3 times as many deaths, which, people are saying, 7 isn't that many, but it's still a lot when you consider they're all recognized as elders in the community, and those communities are impacted with the loss of cultural knowledge that those elders had.
Mm-hmm. Well, Courtney, important work. Appreciate you sharing some of it with us here.
Thanks.
Health officials will soon have a new high-tech tool in the fight against COVID-19. Researchers have developed new testing measures, and thanks to artificial intelligence, doctors can now get results faster and integrate medical data to improve patient care. Scans imported into the software will help them identify the severity and if there are complications from COVID-19. Researchers also say this new way of testing can be developed to remote communities so patients won't have to travel to hospitals to be tested.
So CT is an extremely helpful tool at examining the whole body in a matter of seconds. And this powerful AI machine learning tool can do this in a matter of seconds, automated, and can be a very useful adjunct tool to the PCR test that exists presently.
It's time for one more break, but stick around. We'll show you how social media is once again helping people fight through the boredom of staying at home, this time with jigging. Welcome back. A familiar face has a new gig. Dr. Evan Adams joined the public health branch of Indigenous Services. In addition to being a physician, Adams has also acted and is best known for his role as Thomas Builds the fire in the film Smoke Signals. For the next 2 years, he will be the Deputy Chief Medical Officer at the First Nations and Inuit Health Branch, where he will work with Valerie Gideon and Dr. Tom Wong, both frequent guests on APTN's Nation to Nation. For 40 years, the Good Fish Lake First Nation in Alberta has been operating one of the largest laundry and dry cleaning businesses in Canada. And now they've added something new, COVID masks, and they're a big seller. Chris Stewart has more.
Tom Jackson is the CEO of the Good Fish Lake Business Corporation. Since 1978, the band-owned business has been offering laundry and dry cleaning to the oil sands sector. And business is very good. A fleet of trucks drive daily to Fort McMurray, picking up and dropping off garments for oil giants Syncrude and Suncor. In 1989, they started producing industrial coveralls for oil workers. With COVID, they began to make protective masks.
So we made a bunch for our employees and for the elders of the community, and then made some more for the community as well. And from that, we kind of learned how quickly we could make them, all that type of thing. And we wound up with some fairly major orders for over 100,000 masks for the energy industry.
And retail stores began making orders.
And so we've had to add people and production capacity in the last little while to keep up with the mask orders, which is a very nice problem to have considering everything that's going on with this pandemic and how it's affecting businesses.
Natalie Jackson is one of the seamstresses who was making coveralls, but now makes the masks. She says she can make 300 per day.
It truly is an honor to be helping not only our community, but other communities, and also the industries out there that we normally deal with, Syncrude and Suncor. A true honor.
Natalie says even with the facility making 10,000 masks per week, they are still following safety protocols.
We stay safe and we follow procedure. We practice procedure every day. We are reminded. And so we practice at home when we wear our masks, our protective equipment, everything necessary. We need to stay safe throughout the day.
They are still looking to hire more temporary workers until their masks are no longer needed. Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Edmonton.
Nunavut Civic Nunavut is a program in Ottawa where Nunavut High School graduates get to learn about the Nunavut land claim and prepare for post-secondary education. COVID-19 ended their year early. Wednesday night, they got the kids back together virtually for a graduation ceremony. The grads were treated to a long song by Susan Aglukark and received praise from Inuit leaders. Most importantly, a roll call of graduates. We first met this young man back in October as he started his studies. Now he's a grad.
It's really small.
And that's pretty much became my second home, my second family. I don't think I would have been able to do it without any of the staff or any of the friends that I made down there. I'd like to say a big thank you And also a big thank you to my mother and my brother, older brother, for supporting me my whole life.
To fight boredom during isolation, one Ojibwe dancer decided to create a brand new competition show online. It's called Jigging Idol, and it's just as fun as it sounds. Brittany Hobson caught up with the organizer and one of the winners to bring us this.
We've all heard of American Idol, but a new online competition is putting a twirl and a spin on the reality show to bring us Jigging Idol. Champion jigger Ryan Richard came up with the idea after seeing similar social media talent shows.
Jigging brings out so much fun, and just to add a little competition to that adds even more excitement.
Contestants competed for a cash prize in various categories, including Best Traditional, Best Elder, or Best Jolly Jumper Jigger for the Tiny Tots. Richard created the last category because that's how he got his start. Over the course of a week, dozens of dancers from BC to Ontario submitted videos. Richard, who is from Sandy Bay Ojibwe First Nation in Manitoba, was surprised.
I thought it was going to be a little tiny local thing, but then it just blew up after our first jigger, who happens to be our Jolly Jumper champion.
Unlike other online competitions where people win based on the number of likes or shares, Jigging Idol relied on votes from a judging panel. The judges awarded Felicia Morisseau with top honors. Morisseau has competed in a handful of these competitions during the pandemic.
This is just a nice way to continue showcasing your talent and just to keep on with the physical part of it as well.
Morisseau is a professional dancer with the groups Asham Stompers and United Thunder. She's been dancing for more than 3 decades.
It just means a lot to carry on the traditions of the Red River Jig. It helps to influence the young ones, especially either to get started or to continue on with the participation.
The pandemic has canceled all large group events in Manitoba, meaning Morisseau and her dance groups won't be performing anytime soon. She says online competitions are keeping dancers connected. Richard hopes to host other variations of the contest in the future.
Everyone can jig. There's no wrong way to jig. So jig to health, everyone. Jig to health.
Brittany Hobson, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Those Jolly Jumpers jigging might be the cutest thing I've seen in a while. Well, that does it for our long weekend edition of APTN National News. But before we go, we leave you with some visuals of the CF snowbirds flying over downtown Winnipeg earlier this week. I'm Daryl Stranger. Have a safe and happy long weekend.